Welcome to the OnPoint Podcast. Today's guest is Matt Nelson, the head of Global Medical Excellence and Innovation at Amicus Therapeutics. In my conversation today with Matt, we cover three things. The first is the basis of change within a medical organization when you are building a medical excellence function. The second is how he is using scientific journey as a galvanizing tool to help align both the strategy teams and the medical excellence teams at home office and in the field. And then finally, we take it to Matt's personal medical excellence journey. Matt started off in learning and development and moved into medical excellence, back into the field, and now is leading a global medical excellence capability. And we're going to see how he has changed and what he has learned over those years. I'm excited to share this amazing conversation with you.
Welcome to OnPoint, the Medical Excellence Podcast, where we talk to pharma leaders about how to build highly effective medical affairs organizations.
Hello, and welcome to the OnPoint Podcast. I am so excited to have my friend Matt Nelson today. Matt is the head of Global Medical Excellence and Innovation at Amicus Therapeutics. And I've known Matt for almost a decade, I guess, between here and we first met at Biogen, and he has got such a wealth of experience in multiple roles, leading change in organizations. And I'm excited to share some of the great conversations that Matt and I get to have with the rest of this community. So Matt, welcome to the OnPoint Podcast.
Thank you, Scott. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm excited to chat with you. This is one of my favorite subjects, so we'll have a great conversation today.
I'm looking forward to it. So everyone, there's a lot of things Matt could have talked about today, but there's one area that we thought we would focus on, and that's really leading change in an organization that could sometimes, when you're in a role that is there to create change, may feel conservative, may feel slower. And so we're going to really delve deep into that. But maybe just to get started, it would be helpful to get a little bit of background, Matt, for everyone around your experience. When we first met, you were at Biogen in a learning and development role, and then medical excellence. And I guess at the time, reflecting on it, initiating change didn't seem to be the challenge there. It was so
Not
much
at all.
change happening. How do you harness that? Maybe start there. Just tell us a little about that experience and how that moved you into the excellence role and to the role that you're in today.
Yeah, when we started, I started there at Biogen. I was in field medical, and there was no excellence role. That we were just even building out some capabilities like training and resource development. And there was the organization's the one that recognized there was a need for this, and a need to have someone lead these changes and bring in some of these new capabilities and help us from a medical affairs standpoint grow. So this was a completely new role. Part of the challenge there was the fact that there was so many things that they wanted to put into place, and it was really trying to prioritize and harness all that. And so I was in that role for a couple of years at Biogen before I moved back into the field at Novartis for a short time before taking on a field director role here at Amicus Therapeutics. And when I came on, it was prior to the launch of our first product, and we were just first building out a field medical team in the U.S. So we're in a very different place than we were at Biogen, but I was trying to bring some of those principles and some of the things that we were doing in terms of medical excellence and capabilities over with me into Amicus on the field team. And we really weren't, we had to build a foundation before we even got to that point. But through bringing some of those ideas forward, and we did implement some of the same things such as insight capture and insight reporting and communication that we were doing at Biogen. But it led to me being asked to do other things outside of the field medical role. And I kind of went into, they could see where I could contribute from just an operational standpoint and implementing, new processes, new procedures. And so I went into an operations role, and it was it was more along the lines of just that, just how do we implement new systems? How do we implement new processes, taking over activities across just a bunch of different medical affairs, such as grants and training and so forth. As we mature as an organization, um, that the recognition kind of back like we were in Biogen that, okay, now how do we evolve? And now that we've got a good strategy in place and we have some of the operational pieces in place, now how do we build on that and improve and really be more coordinated and organized as a group and be able to communicate our value to the rest of the organization.
Yes.
But while there's recognition that needs to happen, making it happen, that's a whole new hurdle because it's kind of a new thought process to a lot of folks in this still young organization.
That's awesome. Matt, there's lots there I'd like to delve into. Let's start with the whole idea of leading change in an organization, right? You said that um, as the organization came on board, there were some foundational things that just had to get put in place before you could even start considering some of the more exciting or innovative or strategic things that you wanted to have put in place. Can you maybe just start us there? Like what led you to understand and believe this importance of foundations before moving into broader change?
Well, yeah, I mean, you have to be able to move the business forward, just the day to day activities. When I came here, we were just implementing a CRM tool, so you need to just some of those things like a system to capture the information, and we didn't have policies and procedures even on like how field engagement. That was all being built out as I came. So before we start thinking about how do we introduce new technology or skill development and all, like, we just even needed the basics to get the team up and running and be ready for that launch the first product.
I'd be curious about the differences in the challenge. Because implementing changes, there's always challenge, right? There's always people comfortable in the way things have always been. There's always getting compliance to think differently and to evolve. There's always getting leadership alignment. I'd love to maybe delve into what were the big challenges then of getting foundations in place. And then afterwards, let's compare that to the challenges of the new change that you're trying to put into place now. So what were some of the hurdles that you had to overcome to get foundations in place?
Some of it was coming in. We had we had some folks that had this was their first time that they tried to do any of this, so it was kind of just getting them up to speed on why these certain things are important, why we should invest in these sort of resources. The other is we're a small team and we're wearing multiple hats. So some of it was just to get that in place as people pulled in multiple directions. But it really made a focus on prioritization and understanding we need to have this for the medical affairs teams. These are not nice to have. These are need to have sort of activities and making sure that other key stakeholders within the organization understood that. And then uh, as we were building out our team is actually operationalizing it and having enough people that as a field director at the time, I was building out the CRM for the field team as well as managing the team and trying to get them trained and up to speed on the product. So um, I think one of the biggest challenges is just a resource allocation and time. allocation to implement that. But I think once we got into a place where we're operating smoothly, that was the time that we could start to talk about, okay, how do we make improvements? What's been working? What's not been working? And then where the appetites slowly grew to kind of build off of that. Uh,
Matt, as I think back to some teams that I've had the chance to work with that were just getting foundations in place, I think that I see two challenges. One, you already said, which was kind of the capacity because you're leading and doing the work and changing and building at the same time. The other that I ran into, I would love to see if you ran into this, is the first time that a team gets SOPs and guidance and systems that you have to put things into, the teams tend to take that as a challenge to you don't trust me, right? Like
yes.
up to this point, you trusted me. You knew what I was doing. I didn't need to show it to you. I didn't need to go through all these trainings on this. Like you trained me. Don't you trust me anymore? Did you run
Right.
into that at all?
Oh, absolutely. And because even before I got here, there were activities and informal processes and procedures already being put in place. And then that mindset of, well, we've been doing it and it's working all right. Now, why do we have to have all these set of rules or extra steps to go along with it? And I think it varies based on the individual, where some of them do look at it as, oh, you're looking over my shoulder, or you're impeding me to be able to do what I need to do with all these additional rules and steps. But others, I think part of it is making the team recognize why it's important. And if you don't do it, what are some of the potential consequences, and creating that understanding of we're not just asking you to do this because we want to create extra work for you, but where the actual need is and how it'll protect the organization.
So if somebody was at that spot today, right? They're ahead of field, they're maybe a first time medical excellence lead, and they're just trying to get foundations in place. What are those foundations, and why did you say they were important to help people overcome that fear?
Yeah, but well, I mean, so just even what started coming up was we had a medical team, and they're starting to meet with KOLs, and we're even trying to find who are the right KOLs and all that. They're coming to the leadership and wanting to know, how do I handle this situation, and am I allowed to do this, or I got this sort of request, or I ran into this sort of problem. And taking it for granted, and being in long-standing organizations, those questions were already answered by either systems or processes or tools that we had in place for people to use. And so it just when you had those concrete examples, it kind of made it easy to highlight the need, whether we need an SOP or whether we need some sort of database, or bring in some sort of outside assistance. So, the cases kind of made themselves. It would have been nice to unwrap it as a complete package ready to go, but that wasn't the case. Um, but, um, but yeah, it was actually, once you got into the situation, I think others within the organization could see, oh yeah, we need to do something about this. So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. So let's migrate a little bit. So you got the foundations in place. Then as those foundations got in place, the leadership in the organization said, "Hey, Matt, you're really good at implementing this type of change. Let's say if you can do that as a more formal role versus as a part of your role. And so now you're leading kind of another phase of changes. Maybe just tell us a little about kind of what the change is that you're trying to lead toward now, and how that became the priority.
Yeah, absolutely. So uh, as we've kind of grown as an organization, and we had our field medical teams expanded all across the globe, um, the, there's been this organic growth and teams wanting to do new things, try new things. Um, they hear about great new activities or technology available and kind of want to bring that in. But I've recognized on that end that there needs to be a coordinated alignment as we've grown. So that how are we being effective in managing our resources, but how how we function consistently as a team across the whole organization. Um, but one of the things that also has happened as we've evolved was when we first were going out and built these teams, it was good enough just the fact that we were doing things and that we were meeting with KLs, we had those relationships, and we could put out there that, oh, we've done these ad boards, we've done these symposiums, put out these publications. Um, but as we've evolved, the natural question is, well, how do you know whether what you're doing is working or not? And should we continue to do these things? And um, we're able to say that we've completed all these activities, but what hasn't been there is, okay, has it led to any significant change? So um, as the organization was asked that question, I think there's appetite for also within the medical group, to, especially when we talk about limited resources and what do we put our dollars towards, what types of activities, and when we start asking the question, well, should we do that again? Did it? So there was an opportunity to start looking at how do we capture that impact of what medical affairs is doing. But along with that is also, um, we've been doing all these things and we recognize from the medical team, we're having success and where we're not. But how do we let the rest of the organization be aware of that? And so it is really getting more systematic and formal on the what information we're collecting, and the big thing is how we ultimately communicate that across our other key stakeholders and within the organization. As I mean, as you're aware, medical affairs. So if you asked other people within the organization, they have a vague idea of what medical affairs do and maybe what their perceptions of the one person or two people that they interact with. But
Right.
how do we, as a medical affairs team, do better about letting the rest of the company know, like, oh, the value and and what they're really doing to drive the business forward, and how they're impacting impacting the scientific field and patients in general.
Yeah.
So
It's interesting, right? Because um, in the first phase of change that you talked about, somebody thought it was a good idea to start medical affairs, and nobody really questions that. And so everybody was crystal clear on a vague idea of what medical affairs would go do. They would get us interactions with KOLs, they get people involved in studies, they do patient identification. Like, it was really clear in this small group. And then as it starts to expand, then there's this like new ask of, hey, while we still know those are the things you're going to do, now we want to talk about why we're doing it and how is it working. And it's kind of
yeah,
interesting that it kind of have to grow to that versus starting that way.
yeah, yeah, you're right. It's like these are the things you need to do. And now it's like, okay, we know you're doing those things, but are they working? Are you successful or not?
Yeah.
Um, and I said from the time we got here, that I got here and we were building out this team, I'm like, we want to be the ones that are the drivers from medical saying, this is how we're going to tell you how we're successful or not. And what we're doing, we don't want to wait for someone else to come and apply their own measurements of what success looks like to the medical affairs team. So, creating that awareness that we need to drive that whole conversation, and I think that's recognized across the medical affairs leadership here.
Matt, I hope it's okay. I'd love to maybe share with everybody one of my favorite meetings of the entire year, which was with your LT on this topic, where we had this really great opportunity to talk about what is the impact that medical is going to drive? Like, why is medical here? Why do we generate data? Why do we get it validated through publications and congresses? Why do we educate on it and engage with KOLs around this? Like, we talked about this whole why, and it resulted in something that you had already kind of had in place, but it's evolving around like changing beliefs, changing mindsets. Maybe can you tell everybody just kind of how that conversation went and kind of how it's being used today as that galvanizing, organizing principle to accomplish what you said, which was kind of discussing the impact we're having.
Yeah, so it's been really interesting to see, just in this brief time, like once we've started talking about how do we measure this, how will we communicate it and collect information, I've said to you before, where the light bulbs come on. But we've got to a good point where we've got a great medical strategy for our products in place. And we talk about our medical strategy and strategic imperatives when we're talking about the different activities and stuff we do. But again, we have not had a way to say, is our strategy effective, or what are the imperatives we need to focus more time on. But when we introduce this concept, working with you all on the scientific journey and around both our disease states, and in capturing in a more formal way this, where different HCPs are on that journey, and what their beliefs are around what is essentially our strategy. When we tie that all together and saying, okay, if we start collecting that sort of information and analyzing that information, it's not just the sake of collecting data for collecting data, but how we will effectively take that information and utilize it. And from our medical leads, when they saw it, they're like, this is fantastic. This will be able to really tell me where do we need to evolve different tactics, or give me a sense going into meetings when I'm wanting to propose a new study and evidence generation, and being able to show where the gaps in those beliefs actually are, and really giving them supportive evidence they need to, you know, drive forward areas of strategy where they think we need to focus more on. And then also with that, again, back to resource management, asking for budget. If we can show that, look, we have a huge gap in this strategic imperative, we need to invest more in it. It helps make that case. And then on the flip side, on the field team, that it gives them an overall picture of how things are going within their territory from obviously from an individual HCP level, and it provides direction for them on what they need to be focusing in on during conversations, but then just more in general, like where are things working and where aren't things working in their field engagement. So it was really fun to see when they tied together this belief map and how it worked in the strategy on, okay, this is how I'm going to be able to use this, and this is how it's going to make me more effective in my role.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that was exciting to see is that it was actually your field leadership team that adopted the concept and the approach first, and then reintroduced it to the strategists. And it's interesting. Every time we've done Scientific Journey, it's usually the field team that is trying to evolve something first. And then it goes through a second iteration when the strategists start to go, oh, wait a minute, I'm involved in this, that I can use
Yes.
this, right?
Yes. But I think another, like a very important thing that will come on those is just maintaining focus on our strategy. One of the things we've been guilty about in years previous has been a really cool idea comes like whether from a KOL or out of an ad board. It's like, let's do this new thing, a new study, or build this new resource. But then the question never was, well, how's that tie into strategy, and how is that going to move us forward and what we're trying to achieve in our strategy? But I think this is going to make all our conversations around everything we do is okay. It's going to stick on uh, strategy. And when we talk about whether it's we're doing a symposia or we're looking at IASs and so forth, how is this going to direct the conversation back to how does this fit into our strategy? And it's going to make that the whole team more cohesive and make that the center of all our conversations.
Yeah.
So
Well, it sounds like it's sticking because every time we talk, you're like, hey, I had this digital meeting. And so we were talking about our scientific journey. Hey, we're talking about strategy. And guess what? We talked about the scientific journey. And hey,
yeah,
talking about field deploy. And so I love that it's becoming the anchor that kind of translates strategy to action.
yep,
And it's been really
for
fun to
sure,
watch.
for sure. Yeah, but and we talked about we weren't ready for that several years ago, but we're at that point where as we evolved our strategy and put the right pieces in place, and now it's okay. Now, how do we stay focused and make sure we're doing the most important things that are going to drive our science forward?
Beautiful. So I'm going to ask you the same question I asked you before. So before I said, if you were talking to somebody who is just getting the foundations in place, what are the big 2 or 3 challenges and how do you overcome them? How about at this phase, right? So now that you're getting this phase of strategic alignment, momentum, growth, what were the
Yeah.
top couple of challenges that you faced as you got that up and running?
Yeah. So, I mean, now that we're a bigger organization, one of them is getting alignment even within medical. And there's a lot of moving pieces, a lot of different functions working independently, but like I think it goes back to having a strong vision of what you want to achieve. That's key. And then how you effectively communicate that so that all these different players and stakeholders understand why you're trying to do what you want to do. And it- I, I've, will say I've had varying levels of effectiveness in being able to do that. But uh, when I do clearly communicate the vision, that's when you can see the light bulbs go on, and that's when you get the buy-in. And so I think it's important before you start the enacting change is map that all out and lay it out, and then intentionally think how are you going to roll this out, and start thinking about who's who's going to push back on this, who's going to be your champions to try to bring this forward and have that awareness and utilize others. And so took a stepwise approach. Obviously, you got to get the leadership bought in first that this is something we should be doing and we need to be doing as an organization, and then having a way for the rest of the team to understand how it's going to benefit them. So it's framing up in, we're not just asking you to do this. This is the reason, and this is how your piece fits into us being successful, and then how we're ultimately going to be able to show that what your work that you're doing is really making a difference
Yeah.
and impact. Yeah.
Yeah. You used the word champion. And I believe in all the medical excellence leaders I work with, one of the three things they desire for satisfaction in the job is people who are champions for the work, not just people who say, Matt's making me do this.
Yes.
And it was really clear as I got to meet the team, just like any team, like leaders are on different steps of their own journey and understanding and adopting and championing these concepts. But you had some folks who I would consider fluent, where it became their call, not your call, to galvanize people together. What were some of the things you did purposefully to build champions to get at least the few that I've met who could actually speak to this and make it part of their conversations, even if Matt's not in the room?
Right. Well, I think some of it is that some of the same issues and some of the same sort of hopes that I have in transforming the company. There's others that have either thought about this individually or have an interest in that just don't know how to make it happen or aren't in the right position to make it happen, or again have the capacity to do it. So I've picked up on conversations with different team members and already knew who some of those were, or maybe they've even had past experiences like I did where we were implementing some of this and they want to do it here, the same sort of things here at Amicus. And like I said, we're looking for a way to do it. So a lot of it was just kind of that individual networking and listening and picking up on key things in meetings. If someone brings something up and then following up with them afterwards, I'm like, oh, you had a really good idea. What are you doing with it? And then communicating my vision on where I'd like to see us go as an organization, and then getting that early buy-in, and not just a champion from a voice standpoint, but you getting people that like, let me know how I can help, or I want to be, if you're doing this sort of activity, I'd like to be involved in helping execute it. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, you are such an approachable person and just personally like develop these really great relationships with people that I think sometimes folks that get into the medical excellence space, they create too much formality between them and the people that they're there to help. And they just don't get to have those conversations like you just talked about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that goes back to, I'm sure many people in an excellence role have made their way there through being in the field and being medical science liaison or similar. And that's where you learn that skill and how to, engage and be approachable and um, in networking and building out that. So I've applied that now that I'm no longer in the field. So
Yeah. So, Matt, a lot of the folks who listen to the OnPoint podcast are in these medical excellence roles, either full-time, they're a medical excellence director, or part-time, like you started off, right, where you are doing the medical excellence work while in a field role. But they have a passion for creating this change in organizations. I'd love to delve in just a little bit to your personal journey and maybe start by asking you, given where you are now, if you could go back and give advice to Matt Nelson, day one of your first medical excellence role at Biogen, what have you learned that you would go back and give yourself advice to remember or do differently?
Well, I think one of the things, well, I was in, it was the whole concept was new to me at Biogen then. I mean, medical, that was what, 10 years ago. So there was just that talk of excellence and in what medical excellence actually was. So I was learning at the time, and the reason I got into that role is because I was the one always going to folks with ideas of how we could improve things or how can we tweak this to make things easier or make things more efficient. But I think going back to something I just said, what I wish I knew then that would make me more effective is really having a well thought out plan and then um, making sure you're communicating the benefits. I think I look back then and I remember working with the field medical team, and we would we would have team meetings and trainings. And these are some of my former teammates. And like, why are we doing this? This is just extra work and uh, uh, I think I wish I could have go back and tell myself, how could I be a better salesman on how I pitch what we were doing and make them understand why it benefits them more. And it's not just adding different additional burden. I think that's so important is to what's in it for me when you're trying to implement a lot of this. The other thing I did some then that I wish I would have done more previously is seek their input and go to them and say, what are your biggest challenges? What would you change if you had the opportunity to change it? And then if there's some things that were very straightforward, like at the time was the introduction of maybe an app or something that helped them do their job better. And then you build that kind of equity by, hey, I'm listening to you. I'm addressing what you're telling me your needs are. And then so when I'm implementing something else, they're more likely to buy in. So look for those early, easy wins that you can make a small change that it's really going to impact them or they're going to look at it favorably. So I think that's key.
Yeah. I think, I think if I look back to that same period of time, I probably spent too much time on the dots and not enough time on the lines that connect them.
That's
Right.
a great way to put it.
We dug in so deep on each individual initiative and crafted it and designed it and deployed it, which we have to do. But then we didn't save enough time for, hey, there's all these lines that connect them. And are they as strong as the individual initiatives?
Yep. Yep. I think that goes back to you, like having that overall picture and that, like that, being able to paint that whole vision of this. Okay, these are how all these pieces fit together, and this is what we're ultimately hoping to accomplish, and this is why you should care.
Fair.
Uh,
I guess I would ask the same question now. So if in order to be effective in medical excellence, we need to be growing personally twice as fast as the organization we support in order to be their trusted advisor, in order to help be the lighthouse that they can go towards versus being the tugboat trying to push them. And so I guess I would ask the same question about the future. What are you trying to learn now? What are you trying to become in order to be the medical excellence leader that you're going to need to be in 5 years?
one of the things I'm working on now is trying to keep myself from being pulled in too many directions. And And like part of the excellence role is the people that gravitate to it are like, they want to make things better and they want to see make a difference and how can we improve how we function. But you, the same way as we talked about measuring impact from the medical team and staying focused on strategy. One of the things I have to make sure of, okay, what activities I'm doing that's going to have the biggest impact for the team? What are, what are going to be those recognizable wins in not letting myself get pulled into too many rabbit holes where same sort of thing where this is very interesting and this is a potential need, but like how much is that really going to make a difference if the amount of time I would need to invest in that. So it's really keeping myself focused in thinking about, okay, the changes I want to implement, what are the big ones in
Wow.
that are going to have the most impact, and make sure I stay on my own strategy, like we talked about staying on medical strategy. So I get excited about making change and getting involved in new technology, new things, and I, I have to pull myself back and say, make sure I'm doing what the most important things that need to be done.
I bet everybody who's listening to this just said, yep, guilty.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. It's by nature, the medical excellence role, right?
Yeah. You want to do all these cool things. There's just too many cool things to do.
Yeah. Well, it's really nice to hear you make the connection between, because we've got clarity on the mission for medical affairs and the things that we're going to drive. Now it's something that I can anchor my decisions to and say, does it help increase the capacity to do that, our quality at doing that, how much of it we can do, and have some type of connection between this is an interesting concept versus this is an impactful concept.
Exactly. Just like the scientific journey, but applying it here is like, I am I moving the needle in the activities I'm doing? So it's applying it to myself.
Love it. Matt, this was just one of 100 great conversations this year. I'm glad we could share it with everybody else. I do encourage anybody that wants to keep in touch with Matt, follow him on LinkedIn. He's always so gracious in sharing resources and what he's learned and making connections with people. I think that anybody would have a lot of pleasure getting to know Matt the way I have. So thank you so much, Matt, and looking forward to our next chat.
Yeah. Thank you too, Scott. Really enjoyed it.
Take care.